Thanks, Brandon. It's great to be here. I do find it kind of funny because when he's showing you had these old GPS devices. They're like these big bricks. That's kind of how they were back in the old days. So I'm going to try to figure out how to get this mic to work. But it is fun to be here. This is my first time to Birmingham. So my buddy Seth Richardson invited me to be here. I'm really excited to speak this morning. But I thought it might be helpful to kind of get some background on who I am. See if I can get this to work. You guys hear me there? Is it on? Is it on? I was hearing feedback. Okay, good. Because I'm not from around here. I don't have the southern accent, so apologize for that. But I think we'll find out that I have a lot of things in common, I hope, with most of you. But I want to talk a little bit about myself, my journey. I hope it really resonates with many of you, because if you're in the business world, I know you're struggling or have struggled or will struggle with some of the things that I struggle with. So I want to kind of walk through kind of some of my experiences. But the first thing I was really excited about when I heard about YBL is like, okay, it's got the word young in it. YBL, young. I mean, I've always wanted to stay young, right? In fact, when my kids were in teenage years, I have 3 grown kids. They're all married now. They started calling me old when they were teenage, because that's what teenagers do. And I finally said, okay, look, you cannot call me old until you can beat me in an athletic event. All right, so and this is kind of my emotional game, because when you're a kid, you feel like your dad or your parents are invincible, right? So kind of thought I had them emotionally, but finally they realized, oh, Dad, I can take you in basketball, I can take you in running, and so that only lasted for a couple of years. But the idea is, we still want to stay young, and I know there's a few of us in here young, but some of you guys look like you're more like my age. So I'm kind of more excited about that. That broad audience, but to be young it was something I've always aspired to. And now that I'm not working full time in a kind of a traditional sense, I get asked all the time, okay, what are you doing as a retiree? And we'll talk about retirement here in a second, but I don't relate well to those comments at all. But I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background, because I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Kansas, actually the area that I live in right now. I am just a regular guy, so let's just get that straight. Nothing special other than what God did with me and has done with me and continues to do with me. But I grew up with 2 parents that had twin boys at the age of 18, which, think about that, right? I wasn't ready to get married, have kids. I wasn't ready to even know how to tie my shoes at the age of 18. But my parents had to get married, got pregnant and had to get married. And it's kind of interesting. There's probably been a ton of stories. You may have even told a few this week with Billy Graham's passing. But Billy Graham really had an influence on my parents. They went to a movie that his organization had made, and that's where they became a Christian, is through that Billy Graham message. 1961. So without him, my parents wouldn't have gone the direction they went. I probably wouldn't be standing here today because of that. So there's large influence that he's made on a lot of people. But anyway, my parents had these 2 young boys at the age of 18, and we were competitive. Twins. Is anybody a twin in here? All right, Greg. All right. So there's at least one other. Always getting compared to one another. It kind of drove who I was. My brother and I always competed in everything we did. My parents also had a strong work ethic, so when we were growing up, they said, you're going to work. You're going to get a job and you're going to work. My first job was a paper boy at the age of 10. So I used to throw papers and come home from school every day, have to throw about 200 papers. Of course, we made a game out of it. We wanted to say, how fast can we do it? How can we, who's going to get done first? So every day was a competition, and that's kind of how life was, early days. And then from there, we went into a landscaping business, mowing lawns, making money, bought my first car that way. And then my dad was a contractor. He was an engineer by background, but had worked as working residential commercial construction. So I worked with him, for him, the better part of 10 years through my middle school, high school, and through college even, and did the laborer job that nobody else wanted. So all the grunt work. So learned how to work hard, but even then I was working alongside my brother usually. We were always competing on everything we did. Who's going to get done first? Who's going to get the job done first? So that's kind of who I was and how I grew up. And So I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, where University of Kansas is, and that's where I went to school, undergrad in accounting. I got married in between to my wife, who actually, is a long story there, but we've known each other. We've been married now 33 years, but known her since she was 8 years old. So we knew each other as kids, started dating in college, and then got married after we graduated from college. Decided to get an MBA. Back when it was kind of early on, that degree wasn't really popular then, but in finance, and stayed in school and went to KU, and then had to go out and find a job. So for me, work, that was kind of where, after education, it was, okay, what am I going to do next? And part of my story is I was a big planner. I was a goal setter. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in life. So you'll hear this kind of throughout the talk this morning. Here I'd gone 6 years of college, thought I could take on the world, had a lot of skills, thought I was pretty smart, but probably wasn't. Wanted to find a job, and I struggled finding a job. First year after college, the economy in the mid-'80s was pretty bad. Companies weren't hiring much in Kansas City. I can remember my wife was a nurse. She was working. She had put me through grad school. We were trying to find a job, and I'd been involved in a ministry group, a Christian ministry group in college, and really had desired to use business as a mission to do some work in the culture wherever I was working. Our desire had been to go overseas, go to some foreign country, and this is kind of interesting. I found my first job in Houston, so I moved from Kansas City to Houston. My wife wasn't real excited about it because I had gone down ahead of time to find a place to work. Find a place to live, found an apartment. We moved into the apartment. She was certain there was some drug deals going on next door, so she wasn't really excited about that. But that was our first start as a kind of a married couple, is to move to Houston. I was working for an organization whose goal was to get us sent over to countries where we could work in business. And the areas that they had kind of targeted for us were either South Africa, Serbia, or Croatia, or what's today Serbia, Croatia. And that ended up not occurring because the company didn't make it. They didn't make enough profits to get it, to really get it off the ground. But so then I had to find, hey, what am I going to do? I want to go overseas. I want to do good work for God, is who I was, and it didn't happen. So I found myself asking questions in my mid-20s at this point. Okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Should I go into a ministry full-time? Should I work? I feel like I'm gifted in finance. I want to do that. So I talked to a pastor. I went to my pastor, and he said, well, what do you feel like you're really gifted at? I said, well, financial is what I've studied. This is what I love. I think I could be a CFO someday. And he goes, what's the problem? Why are you struggling with this? If that's what you're gifted at, just go do it. Be the best person you can be. Do hard work. Go to work and roll up your sleeves. Have God in mind in whatever you're doing, and just go try it. And that's it. So that was really an affirmation at that point that it's okay to go into the marketplace, to do excellent work, to work hard, and not to achieve something for me, but to be around people and to serve God through the work that I did. And so that was kind of just an incredible opportunity that I had just to have someone affirm me in my mid-20s. And so here I am making plans, thinking, okay, I'm going to go overseas someday. That doesn't happen. My plan was to, trying to put down goals. I'm going to be a financial person, but I didn't know what it looked like. So I'm planning this every day. Every year. My wife's not a goal setter. She learned that early on, that, okay, we're gonna have some conversations around this because I don't think the way you think. So we had to, have some long conversations about what does it look like to set goals for 5, 10, and 20 years. But that's kind of the early days of what I was doing. And really, ultimately, the question that I've come up through over the years is, okay, who am I? You get asked all this time. We're sitting over at this table here. You guys are all at tables. People always ask, what do you do? Who are you? And one of my main messages today is not who am I, but whose am I? Who do I belong to? Do I belong to my family, which I do, but do I belong to something bigger than me? And what I would say about me, who I am is, or whose I am is, I'm a Christ follower. I am a husband of 33 years. I've got 3 children that are grown. I love fitness and athletics. I love music. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I like to go fast and hard, and have fun doing it. But ultimately, the first thing is I'm a Christ follower, and that influences everything that I do in life. So that was one thing that as I've come through the ranks and worked through the 30-year career that I had in finance and in technology. You still, to this day, you'll get asked, what are you doing? In fact, the fellows, with the fellows program that Brandon mentioned, just had one of our fellows this week. So, Kevin, what do you do? What are you spending your time on? You're not in the corporate world anymore. What are you spending your time doing? And so they're still asking those questions. I try to keep it elusive. If they don't know what I'm doing every day, then that's actually probably a good thing. But to me, it's all about who do I belong to, and how does that influence all areas of my life? And that, for me, that's following Christ, and what does that mean in the workplace? So, I thought I'd share a little bit about the kind of the track from when I was in Houston and in Texas, and I moved around a lot early days, and then ultimately came back to the area that I grew up in. So from Houston, I went to Dallas. I worked for Unisys, which is at the time was a financial and tech firm that was doing a lot of different hardware and software technology. They moved me out to Southern California. I lived in Southern California for about 8 years in Orange County, and did a variety of accounting and financial roles in the corporate sector. And I was learning a lot of things during those periods. I think for those of you who are younger, I was learning what I was not very good at or what I didn't enjoy. I was also occasionally finding things that, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and I'm not good at this. So the era of the 20s was really a learning process for me as I determined, what God had for me and the type of work that I would be doing. I'd say that I'd also found during the 20s, I was learning how to work together with teams. So teaming was really important. I had a great group of men and women that I worked alongside that were similar to me in the financial sector, and we had to work long hours, it seemed like, in the financial area. If those of you who are financial, you kind of know there's just long hours often to close the books and get things done on a timely basis. I also had a difficult boss, so I learned how to manage and work well and differentiate myself because of my faith with a guy who was really hard to deal with. And so that was a learning experience for me during the 20s. And I actually had several people like that I'm like, okay, if I ever lead or if I ever manage, I do not want to be like this person. I mean, it sounds kind of critical, but we all had those people, right? And I was looking back now, I'm like, it was not an easy process, but I was going, man, I do not want to be that person. I don't want to be like Ed. He is tough to deal with, and not really helping those that he's serving. So that was the 20s. Then I was in Southern California, had been trying to move back to Kansas City, which is where the roots were from. My family, my parents all lived there. And we've been praying for years, okay, if we can ever get back to Kansas City, we'd do it. Our kids were born in Southern California, so we wanted to raise the family in the Midwest. And we couldn't get back. We were uncertain about, okay, what are you doing, God? Why are we not able to get where we want to be? And so after 5 or 6 years of praying and saying, okay, where are we supposed to be? It just appeared, okay, we're going to stay put in Southern California. Our kids were, like I said, the kids were young. We bought a house. I was looking to find another job that would make it easier to commute because the traffic is so bad there. And took a job, about to take another job, and I get a call from a recruiter, and they say, would you ever consider going back to Kansas City? I'm like, yeah, I've been trying to do that for years. And they said, we've got a job at Honeywell that you may fit. Would you be able to interview this week? I'm like, yeah, but it's got to move fast because I'm going to buy a house in 3 weeks. So this was on a Monday. Fly to Kansas City. Have an interview on Friday. They make me an offer on Saturday. A week later, I'm backing out of my house, and we're moving to Kansas City. So that was just real, again, another affirmation that, okay, God knows what he's doing. I have my own plans, but he's got it all figured out. We're moving back, and it was not in my timing at all. So that was just a huge encouragement for us as we moved our family back, the young kids, and that's where we've been for the last 20-some years. So I was working for Honeywell, And it was an aviation or aerospace business, and I was doing corporate finance. And one of the last things I did, I was there for about 3 years, but there was a small company called Garmin that my brother-in-law was an engineer, working for as an engineer. And I told him, hey, if the top finance job ever opens up, I'd love to interview there. And so just let me know. And nothing happened. And I'm working at Honeywell, and I'm in a presentation with the top team at Honeywell, and they're saying, there's this company, Garmin, why are they doing so well, and why can't we do as well as they're doing? What are they doing that we're not doing? So you guys, Kevin, you need to go out and look and see how much it would have cost if we bought this company. So I was doing a project of valuation, trying to figure out if we could buy Garmin, but there was no information available. They're a private company, stealth. Nobody knew anything about how much money they made, what their revenue was. So we were just estimating. We thought, based on market share, I came up with an estimate of about $100 million. So I said, okay, Honeywell, if we had $100 million, we could buy them and get that company. And about that time, I get this call from my brother-in-law, hey, you want to come work for Garmin? I'm like, okay, we'll talk. So I told Rob this last night. The two founders, the name Garmin comes from the first names of the two founders, Gary and Min. So Gary's a strong Christian man, kind of a grandfather figure to me now. Min was a Taiwanese native. That's how the name Garmin comes up, just the combination of their two first names. So I interviewed with Gary and Min. During the process, I say, hey, would you guys ever consider going public? Because I actually want to work for a private company. I'm tired of the corporate quarterly earnings rat race. I'd love to be working for a private company. No plans. We're not going to go public. We're going to stay private. Great. 2 thumbs up. I want to do that. So they went ahead and hired me. I came over. First time I opened up the books and saw how much money they made, I could not believe it. They were making like 40% pre-tax earnings on their business in the tech sector, which is unheard of. So right away I knew, okay, my estimate was pretty bad. The $100 million, no, it was way too low. And a year later, Gary walks into my office and says, hey, Kevin, Min and I were talking, what do you think about if we went public? I'm like, I just smile like that. I'm like, you dog. I just said, you told me we were going to stay private. I just said, that's going to change my life a lot if we're public, because I'll have to talk to Wall Street and have to do the investor relations stuff. And he goes, yeah, we think it's the right thing to do. And so that was the decision. That was in early 2000. And within 6 months, we went through a process of going through the IPO, which is a huge process, by the way. If anybody's ever done it, it's you know what I'm talking about. It's an incredible project to go through. But that's probably one of the highlights of what in my working career was to take a company public and do it with the two founders of the guys that started it with just 10 people. So when I started at Garmin in 1999, they had about 1,000 employees around the world, mostly in the U.S., in the U.K., and in Taiwan. And we were trying to go public. There's a whole long story. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but it's going to New York City and trying to get that done. We were using Credit Suisse and Merrill Lynch as the two primary investment bankers. But to then travel around the world on an IPO is pretty interesting. You get on a plane for 2 weeks. We visited, I think, 13 cities in those 2 weeks in Europe and the U.S. We talked to about 70 different institutional investors within that. So every hour you'd be talking to somebody else and just telling the story. Hey, why would you want to buy stock? Why would you want to buy our company? And we went on the NASDAQ, listed on the NASDAQ, and the first day the first day the stock closed at $20 a share, which meant the company was worth about $2 billion. So this is just a couple of years after I did that little $100 million exercise, and here we were the company's worth $2 billion a couple of years later. And then that was really the start of this huge growth. So here I am in my 30s, kind of learning what I feel like at this point I'm now starting to determine. Okay, God's designed me a certain way. I've learned what I'm not good at. I'm starting to figure out what I am good at, and how can I best use those skills. Here I am in an organization where I'm basically the number 2 guy below the CEO, and getting to lead an organization. And by the way, you just heard my background, so I'm just a regular guy, right? So I'm just going to work every day, working hard, trying to make a difference, trying to influence people. And just really just getting into the management ranks too. So I had a few people that worked for me. When I first came to Garmin, I think we had five people that worked for me in terms of the finance team. When I left, we had about 200 that were in finance and accounting around the world. We had 3 legal entities at the IPO, London, or UK, US, and Taiwan. When I left 3 years ago, we had about 55 legal entities around basically every country around the world. So the 1,000 employees that we had when I started grew to about 12,000. So this went from a kind of a mid-sized company to this monster global business. And I was given the opportunity to influence a lot in that company through the 16 years. And I say that not because, again, it's not because of what I did. It's just that that's where God placed me. And God, I'm certain, has placed each of you in unique situations in your workplace as well. And for those of you who have already done what I've done and have stopped working and you're doing other things, He still placed you in unique positions too, and where in areas that you can influence. So, but that was kind of the experience of the Garmin IPO, and then going through a real growth opportunity. The other thing that I've learned is that I had these plans about what I wanted to do, and now looking back here 30 years later, the fact that we were able to build a team of professionals all over the world. I traveled Europe and Asia quite a bit, and I realized that my view of what I was able to do was much smaller than what God had in mind, because I'd hoped to go to I remember I said Serbia, Croatia, or South Africa. Well, we ended up having businesses in every one of those countries, plus Italy, Spain, Denmark, Croatia. Every country you can imagine, I get to influence people around the world. And often they would say, you're different, Kevin. You don't manage like some of the other people. And that's where I had the opportunity to say, it wasn't about what I knew, but it was why I did what I did. And they could see, okay, you're not operating like the typical corporate leader that we've seen in the past. And why is that? And that's where they had the opportunity just to share what I believe, and that is that God has placed each of us on this earth for a reason. And we're to serve others, we're to love our neighbor, we're to make a huge difference in the various callings that He's given us. And I can't even tell you how many opportunities I had just to be able to lead a certain way, and then afterwards, now I wouldn't usually get up in front of a group like this. I often would speak to a group of financial people, or even the Wall Street crowd. There's lots of stories there. The people in New York City are pretty serious about what they do. They're making money, and I didn't fit your typical CFO description, because I would try to tell jokes and kind of stay lighthearted, and they've got their targets they have to hit, and Kevin, you're messing with me, and what are you going to do for me next year? And what about next quarter? I'm like, how have I got the long-term picture in mind? We don't care just about what next quarter is. We want to know what's going to happen 5 to 10 years. And they couldn't deal with me on that. They like to know, okay, I only want to know what next quarter is going to do. So I definitely didn't fit the typical description of a person that would get up and talk about the business. And also, I didn't fit the typical description of what a normal leader would look like in terms of how to influence. So I would often, with the people on my staff, I would often say, I work for these guys. This manager, I work for this person. And people would look, so I often would talk about an inverted organizational chart. I was on the bottom, everybody else was on the top. I was trying to serve them to help them become better at what they did. Because I realized if they were going to be better, it was going to make the overall organization better. And so that would just, talking in those terms just kind of blew my staff's mind. They were like, okay, you're weird. They actually thought I was weird. So, but I kind of enjoyed it to be different, and just to be able to share with them that it's not about me, it's not about ego, it's about how can we work together and accomplish great things. And that's when I had opportunities to say, okay, what do you believe? Well, I believe that God designed me a certain way. He designed you a certain way. you have the obligation or the responsibility to use those gifts. Now, do we work in a world that is perfect? No, we work in a broken world. Okay, that's where we can come together and make a difference. Where you see things that don't work and you need to figure out a way to make them work, use our creativity, our innovation. I guess you guys have an innovation depot here, right? Anybody here from the Innovation Depot? Not today? Okay. I thought that was really interesting. So, but being able to be innovative and creative in the way in which you do your work and how that can make a difference, not only for the people you work around, but for the whole organization and the community, actually. So, so those are some of the kind of the big ideas that I've been able to experience, and it's many one-on-one conversations with people that would come in and talk to me. Kevin, why do you do what you do, and why are you operating the way you're operating? And tell me what's the difference. And this is where I got to talk about Jesus. I got to talk about my faith. I got to talk about the fact that he can use each of us. In fact, he wants to use each of us for the good of the company, good of the community, the cities that we live in. And also, ultimately, that we have a hope afterwards. So I have a hope that not just what we're going to do here makes a difference, but after this life is over, and it starts to feel like it's getting closer and closer for me and probably some of you as well, after this life is over, we have a hope that there's a new creation that's coming. So that's kind of the experience that I've had through life. And now, I mentioned earlier I was going to talk a little bit about what happened after Garmin. And the first thing my wife told me, okay, I'm happy that you're going to cut the cord and not work those incredible hours that you worked, which that's probably one of the failures I had so much going that I probably worked too many hours. My kids were really busy with all kinds of activities. I made as many as I could, but work was really challenging. And so she was thankful that I was pulling the cord and getting out of the corporate world. But she goes, Kevin, let's just get this straight. I'm not going to be your executive assistant after you leave Garmin, all right? So you've got one at work. I'm not going to be that person. And what I've learned after 3 years, actually it didn't take that long. It took about 1 year. I realized I'm actually her executive assistant because that's what's occurred. Now, we're working together. I have an office in the home. Basically, I'm there to serve her, and it's okay. It's kind of fun, actually. But that whole transition away from having 8 hours of meetings a day, people often ask, do you miss it? No, don't miss that at all. What do you miss? I miss the people. I miss the people I worked with. And that's really, hopefully you guys can relate to that. The people that you work with every day do make a difference. And you don't even, maybe many of you don't realize the level of influence you'll have or do have in the various lives that you touch along the way. So that's my message in terms of my career. I thought I'd kind of end with some comments about, for those of you who may be maybe not as far along in the journey in your faith, and I thought I'd actually just throw one message that Jesus brought up in terms of in the New Testament. I was thinking of what would be a potential good conversation this morning. And there's one message that Jesus gives when he talks to a guy that they define as the rich young ruler in Mark 10. And this is a guy that supposedly had everything. He had it all figured out. He comes to Jesus and says, hey, what is it going to take for me to have eternal life? And Jesus says, well, I think the rich young ruler actually says, I've followed all the commandments. Yeah, follow all the commandments. And they list off several of them, don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. List a bunch of them. Yeah, I've taken care of that. Got those covered. Yeah, I'm good there. How about loving your neighbor? Yeah, I love my neighbor too. Yeah, I got that covered too. And then Jesus was, I think, getting to the heart of the matter. He goes, well, then I think you need to take everything that you have, sell it, and give it to the poor. And the rich young ruler's response was he was very sad because he owned a lot. And the reason I bring that up is many of you might here in this room may feel like you've got life figured out. You're a good person. You've basically done followed commandments. You're a good person. You've got a family. You're doing well. Jesus ultimately said, "Have you given me everything? I'm not saying necessarily in a physical sense, but do you really, am I everything to you? And that's where the guy was sad and he walked off. And this isn't the Bible. My perspective is that could have just been the first of many conversations with this guy. He didn't necessarily go away and forever didn't come back. I think he might have come back to Jesus later, but just thinking about have we really given everything that we own and everything that we are and everything that we do at work? Is it all his? And if it is, great. I know that I struggle with that for many times. There's lots of challenges in the marketplace. This is one of the things that I think about daily now. Even today, do I have everything? Have I given him everything? So I just challenge you with that this morning. And also, I'd say for those of you who are maybe not as young and maybe a little older, I tell the fellows, they know they can't use the R word with me. You know what the R word is? That's retirement. I don't really believe in retirement. I think as long as we're on this earth, there's some purpose that we have. And I'm still trying to figure out what that is. Part of it is, giving back to a lot of these young people, like some of the fellows in here, mentoring and coaching. Some of you are mentoring already, which is great. In fact, one of the things I love about this organization, YBL, is the small groups. All the way through my own life, I've been involved with a group of guys. When in my 20s, met in my living room every morning or once a week at 6 a.m. before work, get together with guys. When I was in Dallas and Southern California and Kansas City, always been around a small group of guys that we share life with. And that has been probably other than my wife, has probably been one of the key stabilizing factors, because when you've got other guys that you can bounce ideas off with, you can pray together, you can share, you can complain and whine, and you can do fun stuff together in life, that's really where you can, I think, gain value and also be supported as an individual. So, I really love that about this organization, whether it's small groups, but also even the mentoring that goes on. Both of those, I think, are really critical to living life well and then also finishing well. So, I think we have maybe 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions that you might want to ask me about anything that I stated today? Anybody want to ask a question? Yeah, in the back.
During your time at Garmin, was there ever a period where the company was getting in a little trouble and there may have been layoffs? And how did you handle that sort of situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, there any time in the history when I was at Garmin where there was layoffs or troubles? Yeah, so I used to show charts. My job was pretty easy because we were cranking it. We were just killing it on numbers. We had a 10-year period where we grew on average top line and bottom line about 38% per year. 38% compounded annual growth rate, which is crazy. We went from 100 million when I started to 3.5 billion in revenue. Okay, that was about 2008. Well, there was this thing called the financial crisis in 2008, right? You may have heard of it. And we actually had to lay off about 200 people because of the decline in the economy. And that was really a difficult time because you were actually impacting real people's lives. And I would say I call that kind of the soul of the organization, where you have to deal with, you're no longer needed. We have to make some tough choices. And I had to do that with a couple of people on my team, and having those just really honest conversations, but also serving them and helping them, and it's being as personal as you can about that, other than okay, here's your pink slip, we need your parking pass and your computer and all that stuff. We wanted to make it as personal as we could in a very difficult time. The good thing about that was the only time. It's just that one time, 200 people in the year of spring of 2009. Other than that, we were just growing every year, just new employees all the time. So it was more about managing the growth and making sure everybody's cared for properly, as opposed to just that one time where we cut people. Yeah.
A lot of times, those of us that are consumers might look at something and say, "Hey, Tom might be eating Garmin's lunch," but then we don't really know or have a clue. So that's my first question. And my other question is in terms of intellectual property, as iPhones and others begin to pick up GPS technology, was that an issue in terms of legal and also
Yeah, so the questions are, TomTom, what about them? They're a competition, and then also intellectual property. So, yeah, this could be a Wall Street discussion. This is what I used to talk about all the time. Okay, what's TomTom doing? Well, so when I left, we always measured market share. So Garmin's market share in the automotive navigation space, which is the turn-by-turn directions that are now on your cell phones. At the end, Garmin still was in when I left. I actually haven't seen market share data lately, but I think it's actually gotten better. Garmin's market share globally was around 45%. TomTom had about 35 to 40, and then there's a bunch of small players. So I think they were primarily, TomTom in Netherlands was primarily, that's all they did. They were primarily a navigation. Garmin had this 5 business segments. It was navigation, or automotive, it was fitness, which is now almost $1 billion. 10 years ago, it was zero, now it's $1 billion business. Aviation, marine, and then outdoor handheld devices. So those are the technologies that are actually driving the growth now. Is the fitness, the outdoor, and like hiking and hunting and dog tracking, that kind of thing, and then aviation and marine are all doing really well, despite the fact that the intellectual property on the smartphone has really impacted handheld navigation. So that's one thing about just being a diverse business, is so much better than just being one, focused on one area. So, yeah. Back in the day?
Kevin, I also recall in 2000, that was about the time the tech bubble burst, that's when you were taking the company public.
Yeah.
How was the timing there? How did you weather that storm? How did you personally deal with the technology stock collapse?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. May of 2000 was the tech bubble, and we had just in April of 2000 decided to go public. So I'm thinking, wow, timing is great, isn't it? We're a tech company. And so we pursued it because our profits were so high and we had a great story. And the bankers said, no, you guys can make it through even during a difficult time. So here we are going around, getting everything ready, getting the S1, the document that you have to file with the SEC. And it came to November. And our plan was to go public in December. We actually went public December 7th, 2000. 2 weeks, so I think it was like 13 successive days in a row. Before we went public, the market was down, every day for 13 days. And we're like, are we going to do this or not? And I can remember one of the bankers, we were in New York City, we were in the top of a hotel overlooking Statue of Liberty. I can still remember. It was Gary, Min, and myself in a room. We walked in there, okay, what are we going to do? One of the bankers said, yes, you should go. One of the bankers said, no, you shouldn't. The story won't sell. And here we are. Gary's a strong Christian. Min's not, and I am. And I'm not going to tell you who voted what, but we voted. And 2 of us said we should go, and 1 of us said we shouldn't. So we went ahead and went. We went public, and it did well. But it was a tough time, and you're sitting there you spent all this time, you want to get it done, but when the market is down that much, can you imagine 13 successive days today if that would happen? Nobody would do it. But we felt like we had a good enough story, and it worked out. So,
You talk a lot about how your faith is foundational for success, but when did you actually come to Christ? Like, how did that process actually happen?
Oh, that's a great question. When did I come to Christ? I was 10 years old. I grew up in a church. I was 10 years old. So I felt the need to accept Jesus when I was that age. Now, my faith has changed a lot since then. That was just the beginning, right? So I've had other opportunities to really grow through small groups is a key part of that, always being involved with other men. But yeah, I grew up in the church. My wife actually was the daughter of the pastor of the church I grew up in. So I married a pastor's.
Was your brother on the same page with you with that?
My brother was too, yeah. All right, I think we're out of time. I apologize. I'll hang out afterwards if you want to ask more questions. But it's been a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Hopefully you found it helpful. And I guess I'm turning it back to Ben. Yeah. Thank you.